They told me the Archimedes Station had just gone dark due to a power failure. They offered me triple pay to go down 6 miles and fix it. But they didn't tell me that the crew was still inside, and that they weren't human anymore. This is the story of the Resonant Deep. Welcome to my channel. Tonight's story is a dive into cosmic horror. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the pressure build. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Pressure Drop. The ocean doesn't hate you. Hate implies an emotion, a capacity for judgment. The ocean just is. It is 6 miles of crushing black water that wants to reclaim the space your lungs are currently borrowing. I've been a saturation diver for 20 years. I've welded pipelines in the North Sea while waves the size of office buildings crashed over the support rigs. I've recovered bodies from sunken ferries in the sticky silt of the Amazon Delta. I know the water. I respect it, but I had never feared it. Not until the contract for the Archimedes. It was a rush job. That was the first red flag. Corporate deep-sea habitats don't just go dark. They have redundancies for their redundancies. If the comms go out, there's a hardline. If the hardline snaps, there are sonic buoys. For the Archimedes, a clandestine research station sitting on the lip of the Tonga Trench, to go completely silent meant something catastrophic had happened. Or, as the company rep in the pristine suit told me, a localized systems failure requiring manual intervention. They offered me triple my yearly salary for a 3-day job. Get in, restart the fusion reactor, re-establish comms, get out. No questions about what they were studying down there. No questions about why the previous maintenance crew hadn't reported back. The descent took 4 hours. I sat in the cramped pilot seat of the Guppy, a modified submersible designed for extreme depths, watching the light fade from turquoise to indigo, and finally, to a black so absolute it felt heavy on the eyes. The digital depth gauge ticked upward. 2,000 meters, 5,000 meters, 8,000 meters. At this depth, biology changes. The fish are gelatinous, transparent ghosts that shouldn't exist. But eventually, even they disappear. Down here, there is only the silt, the pressure, and the cold. Approaching Archimedes' perimeter, I spoke into the recorder, mostly to hear my own voice. The silence in the sub was thick. Sonar is picking up the structure. No ping back. She's sleeping. I triggered the exterior floodlights. The darkness didn't retreat. It just reluctantly stepped back. The beams cut through the gloom, revealing the station. It was a marvel of engineering, a sprawling complex of titanium spheres and reinforced glass tunnels anchored to the jagged rock of the trench wall. It looked like a cluster of giant, metallic sea grapes clinging to a cliff face. Control, this is Miller. I have visual. Exterior lights are off. No movement in the observation bubble. Proceeding to docking clamp. There was no answer from Control. I was too deep for real-time voice. I was just talking to the recording tape now. I maneuvered the Guppy over the docking hatch of Sector 4. The metallic clang of the locking mechanism reverberated through the hull, a lonely sound that rang like a bell. I watched the pressure equalization gauge cycle from red to green. The hiss of the airlock opening sounded like a dying breath. I grabbed my toolkit and the heavy flashlight, checking the seal on my suit. The air inside the station would be recycled, stale, but breathable. Or it should be. I cracked the hatch and pulled myself up into the airlock of the Archimedes. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the smell of death. I know that smell. It's sweet and cloying. This was different. It smelled like ozone and wet copper, like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. And underneath that, something else. Something musky and ancient, like tidal mud exposed to the sun for the first time in a billion years. Hello, I called out. My voice echoed down the corrugated metal hallway. Maintenance. Sound off. Silence. But not total silence. As I stood there, adjusting to the gravity of the station, I heard it. A low, rhythmic thrumming. It was barely audible, more of a vibration in the floor grating than a sound in the air. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a heartbeat. A very, very slow heartbeat. I checked the wall panel. The reactor was offline, running on emergency batteries. That explained the dim, flickering red emergency lights. But if the reactor was off, what was making the floor vibrate? I walked toward the central hub, my magnetic boots clanking heavily. The station was pristine. No signs of struggle. No explosion marks. A coffee cup sat on a console in the hallway, a layer of green mold across the liquid, but undisturbed. It was as if everyone had just vanished mid-sip. I reached the blast doors of the mess hall. If the crew was alive, they'd be gathered there. It was the designated emergency muster point. I keyed the manual override. The hydraulics groaned, protesting the lack of power, and the heavy doors slid open a few feet. I squeezed through. Anyone home? The beam of my flashlight cut across the room. Tables were overturned. Trays of rotting food were scattered across the floor. And on the far wall, scratched into the steel bulkhead with something sharp, a knife, maybe, or a fork, was a spiral. It wasn't a perfect spiral. It was jagged, frantic. It started tight in the center and widened until it covered the entire wall, the lines carved deep enough to expose the raw metal beneath the paint. And in the center of the room, sitting on a single upright chair, facing that spiral, was a suit. Not a person, just a diving suit. The heavy, deep-sea rigid type. It was propped up as if someone was sitting in it. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hey, can you hear me?" I reached out and tapped the glass faceplate. The suit was empty. But it wasn't just empty. The inside of the helmet was coated in a thick, translucent slime. And resting on the seat of the chair, inside the hollow legs of the suit, was a pile of gray dust. Like ash. Or bone meal. I turned back to the wall, to that frantic scratching. Underneath the spiral, in smaller, shaky letters, someone had carved 3 words. It sings up. Chapter 2. The Geometry of Sound. I should have turned back. The logical part of my brain, the part that kept me alive on the oil rigs, screamed at me to get back in the guppy and ascend. But I couldn't. I had a job, and more importantly, I had a morbid curiosity that was starting to itch at the back of my skull. I needed to get the power back on. The main reactor was in Sector 9, the deepest part of the station, hanging over the abyss of the trench. I moved through the corridors, the red emergency lights casting long, dancing shadows that looked too much like limbs. The vibration in the floor was getting stronger. Thump, thump. It was slower now, but heavier. It made my teeth ache. I found the first logbook in the medical bay. The med bay was a wreck. Cabinets smashed, glass vials crunched into the floor. I found a tablet on the desk of the chief medical officer, Dr. Elias Thorne. It had enough battery left for me to access the audio logs. I played the entry dated 2 weeks ago. Click. This is Dr. Thorne. Day 45 of the excavation. We've found something. The sonar scans were wrong. It's not a geological formation. It's a cavity. A hollow space inside the trench wall, sealed for God knows how long. Use of the laser drill has been authorized. The crew is excited. We're going to be famous. We're going to rewrite geology. His voice sounded professional, eager. I skipped forward a week. Click. Day 52. We breached the cavity. No water rush. It's pressurized. But the moment the drill broke through, the sound started. You can't hear it on the audio recorders. It's too low frequency. Infrasound. But you can feel it. It vibrates the fluid in your inner ear. Half the crew is nauseous. Operations are paused while we analyze the acoustics. It's rhythmic. I skipped again. 3 days later. Click. Day 55. Nobody is sleeping. We can't sleep. When you close your eyes, the sound gets louder. It turns into light. I know how that sounds. Synesthesia. But it's true. I close my eyes and I see colors I can't name. Colors that hurt. Engineer Lewis tried to puncture his own eardrums with a screwdriver this morning. He said he wanted to let the pressure out. We had to sedate him. The sedative didn't work. He's just lying there, staring at the ceiling, humming along with it. The audio cut out with a burst of static. I looked at the empty bio beds. The restraints on one of them were torn. Not unlocked, torn. Leather straps snapped like paper. I put the tablet down. My hand was shaking. The thrumming in the floor was syncing with my heartbeat. Or maybe my heart was syncing with it. I left the med bay and headed for the reactor. The air was getting warmer. Humid. Condensation dripped from the ceiling pipes like sweat. As I approached the junction to Sector 9, I saw something that stopped me dead. The hallway twisted. It wasn't a structural collapse. The metal itself, high-grade, pressure-resistant titanium alloy, was warped. It looked like someone had taken the corridor and twisted it like a wet towel. The floor became the wall became the ceiling. Pipes spiraled around each other in impossible knots that didn't kink or break. It looked organic. It looked like the station was growing. I stepped carefully onto what used to be the wall, my magnetic boots struggling to find purchase on the curved surface. The geometry was wrong. The angles hurt to look at. It was as if the three-dimensional space of the hallway was being folded into a fourth dimension. And standing in the middle of the twisted corridor, facing away from me, was a man. He was wearing a lab coat, stained with grease, and something dark. He was standing perfectly still, looking at a vent where the steam was escaping in rhythmic puffs. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Identify yourself." He didn't turn. He didn't flinch. I said, "Identify yourself." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he turned his head. It was Dr. Thorne. I recognized him from his ID photo on the tablet. But his face was slack. His eyes were wide, pupils blown so large his eyes were entirely black. "Can you hear the choir?" he whispered. His voice was dry, like grinding stones. "Dr. Thorne, we need to leave. The station is compromised." He smiled. It was a gentle, terrifying smile. "Compromised? No. We've been improved. We've been tuned." He raised a hand and pointed toward the floor, toward the deep. "The rock isn't rock, Miller," he said, knowing my name though I'd never spoken it. "It's a shell. We cracked the shell. And now the chick is singing." "Stay back," I warned, raising my heavy wrench. "It's beautiful," Thorne wept, tears streaming down his face. But the tears weren't clear. They were black, oily. "It vibrates the carbon in your cells. It rearranges you. It takes the chaos of biology and gives it structure. Perfect, crystalline structure." He took a step toward me. "Let it in, Miller. Don't be discordant." I swung the wrench. It was a panic reaction. I aimed for his shoulder, just to knock him down. The wrench connected, but there was no crunch of bone. Thorne shattered. He didn't bleed. He broke apart like a porcelain statue dropped on concrete. His arm, his chest, his head, they fractured into thousands of geometric shards. There was no meat inside, no blood, just layers and layers of complex, fractal crystals arranged in the shape of a man. The pile of crystals clattered to the floor, vibrating, humming that same low note. I scrambled back, gasping, backing away until I hit the wall. I looked at the pile of glistening shards that used to be a human being. The vibration in the floor spiked. A sudden, sharp jolt. And then, over the station's intercom, a voice spoke. It wasn't human. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates, layered with the sound of whales' song, pitched up into a scream. "Open the door." Chapter 3, The Abyssal Choir. I ran. I scrambled through the twisted hallway, ignoring the nausea churning in my gut. The sound wasn't just in the floor anymore. It was inside my head. It felt like a migraine that had learned to sing. Thump, thump. I needed to get to the reactor. Why? I don't know. Maybe I thought if I restored power, I could close the blast shutters. Maybe I thought the radiation would kill whatever was down there. Or maybe I just wanted the lights on so I didn't have to die in the dark. I reached the heavy blast door of Sector 9. It was sealed. Override. I gasped, slamming my hand onto the panel. Code Alpha 90. Access denied, the computer chirped. Lockdown initiated by administrator. Open the damn door. I screamed, hitting the metal with my wrench. Access denied. I looked through the thick, reinforced viewport into the reactor room. The reactor room was massive, a cathedral of machinery designed to harness the power of the atom. But the reactor wasn't the centerpiece anymore. The floor of the reactor chamber had been cut away. The thick titanium plating had been sliced open, not melted, but erased, revealing the raw rock of the trench below. And in that rock, there was a hole. It was about 10 feet wide, a jagged wound in the crust of the earth. And out of that hole, a light was shining. It wasn't a normal light. It was a color that reminded me of a bruise, a violet so dark it was almost black, pulsing with a sickly, ultraviolet energy. Standing around the hole, forming a perfect circle, were the rest of the crew. There must have been 20 of them. Scientists, engineers, kitchen staff. They were all naked. Their clothes were piled neatly in the corner. They stood hand in hand, facing the pit, swaying back and forth. Their skin was wrong. It rippled, like there was something moving underneath the dermis. As I watched, the pulsing light from the pit flared brighter. The crew opened their mouths. I couldn't hear them through the blast glass, but I felt it. A scream. A collective, harmonic scream that hit the glass so hard I saw stress fractures appear in the corner of the viewport. Then, the man closest to the pit, a large man who looked like the security chief, stepped forward. He didn't jump. He didn't fall. He stepped out into the empty air above the hole. Gravity didn't take him. He floated there, suspended in the violet light. Then, he began to unzip. That's the only way I can describe it. His skin split down the center of his spine, and something unfolded from within. It wasn't a skeleton. It was a fan of translucent, iridescent membranes, like the wings of a deep-sea jelly, but sharp, rigid. He was transforming. He was shedding his humanity like a chrysalis. The others watched, swaying, their bodies rippling in sympathy. I watched in horror as the thing that used to be the security chief elongated, stretching out into a ribbon of light and flesh, and then dived down into the hole, into the earth. The remaining crew took a step forward. I had to stop them, or I had to stop it. I looked at the control panel next to the door. The reactor scram. If I could trigger a manual flush, I could flood the chamber with coolant and radiation. It might kill the crew, but they were already dead. Or worse. I ripped the panel off the wall, exposing the wiring. I was a welder, not a hacker, but I knew how to short a circuit. I jammed the wrench into the bundle of wires. Sparks showered over me. Warning. Coolant flush initiated. Inside the room, massive vents opened. White, freezing gas poured into the chamber. The crew didn't even flinch. The cold hit them, freezing the moisture on their skin instantly, but they kept swaying. But the light from the pit, it reacted. The violet glow turned angry. It shifted to a harsh, blinding white. And then, the entity in the pit noticed me. I didn't see a face. I didn't see eyes. I just felt a sudden, crushing weight on my mind. It was like the pressure of the ocean had suddenly bypassed the hull of the station and pressed directly onto my brain. I see you, little shell. The voice wasn't sound. It was a thought forced into my head with the violence of a railgun. Why do you resist the song? Blood began to drip from my nose. My vision blurred. Inside the chamber, the crew turned toward the window. Toward me. All of them. In unison. Their eyes were gone. In the sockets, tiny, spinning crystals glowed with that violet light. They walked toward the glass. Thump. Thump. Crack. The spiderweb fracture on the viewport expanded. I scrambled back. I had to get to the guppy. I had to get out. But as I turned to run, I saw the corridor behind me. The walls were gone. The metal hallway had dissolved. Instead of the station, I was standing on a ledge of black rock, overlooking a vast, endless city of spiraling towers and impossible geometry that stretched down into the abyss. The station wasn't just damaged. It was being digested. The reality of the surface world was being replaced by the reality of the thing in the pit. I was 6 miles deep, and the ocean was gone. There was only the city, and the song, and I was the only discord left. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Madness. I didn't run because I was brave. I ran because my legs were the only part of me that still understood physics. My mind was trying to process a hallway that had become an esophagus of glass and starlight, but my legs just knew. Move or die. I stumbled away from the reactor, away from the shattering viewport and the crew of crystal mannequins. I needed to reach Sector 4, the docking bay, the guppy, but the station was fighting me. The corridor wasn't straight anymore. It stretched and breathed. The metal bulkheads groaned, not with the stress of water pressure, but with the growing pains of something transforming. Pipes burst, but they didn't spray steam or oil. They sprayed a fine, glittering mist that smelled like ozone and petrichor. I slipped on a patch of this mist and went down hard. My helmet clanged against the deck, or what I thought was the deck. When I looked up, I wasn't in the corridor. I was in a memory, but it wasn't my memory. I was standing in a suburban kitchen. Sunlight, bright, yellow, impossible sunlight, streamed through a window over a sink full of soapy water. A woman was standing there, scrubbing a plate. She was humming. "Sarah?" I croaked. It was the chief engineer's wife. I remembered her from a photo on his bunk. She turned to look at me, but her face wasn't right. It was sliding off her skull. The skin was melting like wax, revealing not bone, but that same dark, violet geometry beneath. "It's so loud, Elias," she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "The sun is so loud today." She reached into the soapy water and pulled out a knife. But as she lifted it, the knife elongated, twisting into a spiral of metal. She smiled, raised the spiral, and drove it into her own eye. I screamed. The kitchen shattered. The sunlight fractured into shards of cold, blue LED light. I was back in the corridor. I was lying on the floor, hyperventilating. The air in the station was changing. It was getting thinner, sharper. It tasted metallic. I scrambled to my feet. The heartbeat I had heard earlier was gone. It had been replaced by a constant, droning chord. It was a sound that didn't just vibrate the air, it vibrated the calcium in my bones. My teeth felt loose in my jaw. "Do not leave." The voice returned. It wasn't angry. It was curious, like a child poking an insect that was trying to crawl out of a jar. "We have so much to show you. The universe is not empty. It is teeming. You are alone in a crowded room with your eyes closed." "Get out of my head," I shouted, stumbling forward. I rounded the corner to Sector 6 and froze. The corridor was blocked, not by debris, but by growth. The walls had sprouted translucent, crystalline stalagmites. They glowed with a soft, bioluminescent pulse. And trapped inside the largest crystal, suspended like a fly in amber, was the corpse of the station's communications officer. He wasn't dead, though. Not fully. His eyes tracked me. His mouth opened and closed, silently mouthing words. I stepped closer, mesmerized by the horror of it. I could see his veins pulsing, but the blood inside wasn't red. It was glowing white. He pressed a hand against the inside of his crystal coffin. I saw the vibration of his throat. I leaned in, pressing my helmet against the crystal to hear him through conduction. "Don't go up," he was whispering over and over. "The sky is a lie. The sky is just the bottom of another ocean. There is no surface. It goes up forever. Beasts all the way up." I recoiled, sickened. I had to get past him. The crystal blockage filled the hallway, leaving only a narrow gap near the ceiling pipes. I climbed. My magnetic boots slipped on the slick, organic surface of the crystals. I dragged myself over the top of the officer's tomb. I tried not to look down, but I couldn't help it. As I shimmied over him, he looked up. He stopped whispering. He smiled. And then he exploded. The crystal shattered outward. Sharp, diamond-hard shrapnel sprayed the corridor. I threw my arms over my faceplate. A shard the size of a butcher's knife slammed into my shoulder, punching through the thick material of my dive suit. Pain, cold and blinding, shot down my arm. The suit's integrity alarm started screaming. Pressure alert. Seal compromised. I fell from the ceiling, landing hard on the deck. I grasped my shoulder. The shard was embedded deep, pinning the suit material to my flesh. Blood welled up, dark and red, contrasting violently with the pristine white glow of the alien crystals. The wound hissed. The air from my suit was leaking out, and the toxic, heavy atmosphere of the transformed station was leaking in. I fumbled for my patch kit with my good hand, slapping a sealant foam over the breach. It hissed and hardened, stopping the leak. But the damage was done. I could feel the infection spreading. Not a bacteria, but a resonance. My shoulder didn't throb, it hummed. I staggered to my feet. Sector 4, I chanted to myself. Sector 4, get to the guppy. Get to the guppy. Chapter 5, The Leviathan's Eye. I made it to the airlock of Sector 4. My vision was tunneling. The edges of my sight were filled with fractal patterns, spinning triangles, and impossible cubes that overlaid the real world. The song was getting louder. It sounded like a choir of a million voices, all singing a single, perfect note that demanded I harmonize. I cycled the inner airlock door. Please be there. Please be there. The door hissed open. The docking bay was huge, a cavernous hangar designed to hold 3 submersibles. The guppy was there. It was clamped to the deployment crane, hanging over the moon pool, the open water access in the floor of the station. But the moon pool wasn't water anymore. The opening in the floor, usually a circle of black, churning seawater, was now a solid lens of violet light. It looked like a giant, unblinking eye staring up from the abyss. And standing between me and the guppy was the thing that used to be the security chief. It was hovering a few feet off the ground. The wings I had seen earlier were fully unfurled now, spanning 20 feet, made of shimmering, hard light. Where a human face should have been, there was only a smooth, blank surface of obsidian. You cannot leave, the entity spoke. The voice knocked me to my knees. You have seen the truth. To return to the silence would be cruelty. I like the silence. I yelled, pulling myself up. I didn't have a weapon. I had a heavy flashlight and a wrench. Against a demigod of the deep, I was an ant with a toothpick. But I had the station. I looked at the control panel on the wall near me. It controlled the overhead gantry cranes. The entity drifted toward me. It didn't walk. It just expanded, occupying more space, terrifyingly fast. Join the choir. We are building a ladder to the stars. We will consume the ocean, and then we will consume the sky. Eat this, I spat. I slammed my fist onto the crane release button. Above the entity, a 2-ton cargo container, suspended on a magnetic hoist, disengaged. It fell. It wasn't a graceful fall. It was a brutally heavy slam of industrial steel. The container crashed directly onto the entity. There was a sound like a gong being struck underwater, a deep, resonating boom. The floor plates buckled. Dust and crystal shards flew into the air. The container lay there, crushing the creature beneath it. I didn't wait to see if it worked. I sprinted for the guppy. I scrambled up the ladder to the sub's top hatch. My injured shoulder screamed in protest, but the adrenaline drowned it out. I spun the wheel, popped the seal, and dropped inside the tiny, cramped cockpit. It smelled like hydraulic fluid and old coffee. It smelled like humanity. It was the best thing I'd ever smelled. I dogged the hatch shut and locked it. Power up, I gasped, flipping switches. Come on, you piece of junk. The screens flickered to life. The reactor hummed, a normal, mechanical hum. Proximity alert, the computer warned. I looked out the front viewport. The cargo container on the dock floor was moving. Metal groaned and shrieked as the steel box was torn apart from the inside. 2 massive, glowing hands ripped through the metal plating. The entity rose from the wreckage. It wasn't flattened. It wasn't even hurt. It was angry. The obsidian face rippled, and a mouth formed. A vertical slit that opened way too wide, revealing rows of spinning light instead of teeth. It let out a scream that cracked the reinforced glass of the docking bay. Silence is death. It lunged toward the guppy. I slammed the release lever. The clamps holding the sub to the station disengaged. The guppy dropped. We fell through the moon pool, straight into the violet eye. Chapter 6, The Bends. I expected to hit water. I expected the familiar resistance of the ocean. Instead, I fell into the void. The exterior cameras showed nothing but swirling, chaotic color. It was like falling through a kaleidoscope. The depth gauge spun wildly. Error. Depth. Infinite. Ballast. I screamed. Below emergency ballast. I triggered the explosive bolts on the ascent weights. The sub shuddered as 2 tons of lead were jettisoned. The guppy lurched, slowing its descent. The buoyancy took over. We started to rise. But the entity wasn't letting go. Through the rear camera, I saw it. A tendril of violet light, like a harpoon made of plasma, was attached to the rear propeller. It was dragging me back down. The hull groaned. Rivets popped, shooting across the cockpit like bullets. The frame of the sub was being stretched. "I can fix you," the voice whispered, intimate and terrifying, right in my ear. "I can make you flawless." I looked at the throttle. I was at max power. It wasn't enough. I looked at the oxygen mixture controls. If I increased the oxygen flow to the engine intake, I could run the mix lean. It would burn hotter. It might melt the pistons. It might turn the engine into a bomb. But a bomb has thrust. "Burn," I snarled. I wrenched the mixture valve to 100%. The engine roared. It was a terrible, grinding sound, the sound of a machine dying violently. The temperature gauge redlined instantly, but the surge of power kicked the guppy forward. The sudden acceleration slammed me back into the pilot's seat. The metal tendril holding us pulled taut. The sub screamed under the tension. Snap! The propeller shaft sheared off. But the momentum was enough. We broke free. The guppy rocketed upward, leaving the violet light behind. Blackness returned. Blessed, heavy, silent blackness. I watched the depth gauge. It was flickering, but the numbers were dropping. 8,000 meters. 7,000. 6,000. I slumped in the seat, laughing hysterically. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the sweat and the blood from my nose. "I made it," I whispered. "I beat you." I watched the ascent for hours. The black turned to indigo. The indigo turned to turquoise. And finally, the blinding, beautiful white of the surface sun broke through the viewport. I breached. The guppy bobbed on the waves of the Pacific. I popped the hatch. Real air rushed in. Salty, hot, humid air. I climbed out onto the hull of the sub. The sky was blue. The sun was yellow. Seagulls were crying overhead. A rescue chopper was already inbound, a speck in the distance. The company had been watching. I laid back on the curved hull, closing my eyes, letting the sun burn my face. I was safe. And then, I heard it. It was faint. So faint that you would miss it if you weren't listening for it. Thump, thump. It wasn't coming from the ocean. It wasn't coming from the sub. I put my hand to my chest. My heart was beating. But between the beats, there was a second rhythm. A syncopated echo. I coughed. My throat felt scratchy, like I had swallowed sand. I hacked, spitting onto the white hull of the sub. It wasn't phlegm. Sitting in the center of the spittle was a tiny, perfect crystal. Violet. Pulsing. I stared at it as the helicopter roared overhead, the rescue swimmer jumping into the water. The crystal vibrated. And in the silence of my own skull, the choir began to warm up again. I hadn't escaped. I was just the carrier. The end. And that brings us to the end of the Resonant Deep. It seems that some things buried in the ocean are meant to stay buried. I'd love to know what you think happens next. Does the infection spread to the rest of the world, or does it end with him? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into the abyss, please leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories to help you drift off into the dark, make sure you're subscribed and have the notification bell turned on. I'll see you in the next nightmare. Good night.